Hey everybody, and welcome back to another scenario playthrough. This is part number 2 of our Crumbly Woods playthrough. We have to get 1,200 guests in our park by the end of October year 3, and we are well on our way to doing that. Last go around, we replaced pretty much all of the rides, since the rides that are given in this scenario are fairly old, so you can't charge a whole lot for them any longer, and they break down fairly often. So we have, while we've upgraded them, also replaced them. So now we're on to the last coaster, and this is Double Trouble. This is a Mobius racing coaster. Mobius meaning if you leave on the right-hand station, you return on the left-hand station. So it ends up being only one coaster. So we're going to give this thing a little bit of a facelift, kind of going for a bit of a Grand National Blackpool style. There's only been a couple of Mobius wooden coasters that have been running in recent years. Grand National Blackpool being one of them, Kennywood's Racer being another one, and the roller coaster at Chapultepec in Mexico City, which sadly closed a couple of years ago after the accident with Chimera, which is a shame because it was a good coaster. It was fairly rough, but it was a good one. But either way, we're going to kind of base this off a little bit of Grand National with the figure 8 kind of initial section, and then we'll kind of free form it a little bit from there. One of the challenges of doing a racing coaster, racing/dueling coaster on or in the game is just making sure that the thing aligns. And you'll notice I'm not really testing it here, and that's actually just, I've done a bunch of these, and I kind of have a feeling as to kind of sort of where it's going to land, and how I do that is really by making sure that I'm sort of alternating our left and right-hand corners, which is kind of how the figure 8 dictates itself, and also making sure that all the corners are sort of relatively the same speed, so you kind of want to be able to give one side a chance to sort of catch up on the other side a little bit. Certainly you can use the ghost vehicle and test this, but in order to do that, you'd need to do two separate roller coasters, at least from the testing purposes. But in this instance, I think we're going to kind of trust our gut here initially. Now we are trying to do kind of sort of the same layout, so we want to get a nice little drop underneath that pathway there over top of the water. So at the moment I'm trying to figure out how to turn this thing back to align itself against something. In general with wooden coasters, you kind of want to get them to align each other sort of parallel, because the bends, which are the horizontal perpendicular to the track support structures, can be made just wider to accommodate more tracks, and that's a fairly standard thing in wooden coaster design, especially some of the old sort of Cyclone models, as you could stack them. So here's where we rethink this just a little bit and back up off of what we were doing before and now go for this sort of figure 8 thing. You'll notice not all the drops drop straight to the bottom of the available height. We kind of bounce it a little bit and have some of these small little hills, and then also double downs, double ups, and things like that. In general, it just makes for a more interesting coaster, but also it helps us kind of fill in the gap. Basically, we know where the corners have to be to align very nicely with the rest of the coaster structure. So you kind of build in those corners and then sort of fill in the gaps in between and go with that. So now we have a very nice figure 8 with nice parallel sections here, and we are moving a little bit of landscape here to get this thing aligned for our little dive down towards the water here. And now we'll depart from that figure 8 and kind of head in this direction so we can kind of head down towards the rest of the layout. It's already a fairly long layout, and actually it's going to be a fairly big coaster all said and done. So we'll go ahead and remove the rest of this. Now the original one has kind of one spot where it splits apart, crosses over itself, and then comes back together. So that gets you your Mobius crossover element and makes it become a racing and dueling coaster. I get this question a fair amount of time is what's the difference between a racing coaster and a dueling coaster, and there is a distinctive difference. A racing coaster is a side-by-side heading in the same direction type of attraction. A dueling coaster is one that has head-on passes. So if you have both of those things, it becomes a racing and a dueling coaster. So up until this point, this is just a racing coaster, but we have to cross over ourselves at some point here, so we are going to become a dueling coaster at that point, so then we becomes effectively a racing dueling coaster. So that's the difference. A racing coaster is typically side by side for most of the time. A dueling coaster is typically going to have, say, 3, 4, maybe 5 if you're lucky, moments around the layout where the thing comes head to head. Think like the old Gwazi coaster, for example, or Dueling Dragons, also rest in peace. But it typically, if you balance it a little bit, like Lightning Racer at Hershey Park, you get a kind of nice elements of racing, kind of mixed with that dueling head-to-head passing moments. So those are your two things there. I think the popular one at the moment is Starfall Racers at Epic Universe. So that's both a racing and a dueling coaster as well. More racing than dueling, but has some fairly cool interactive elements there with the airtime hills and the crossover rolls with it. So we're going off on a little bit of a tangent here, but you can see here we're crossing over right now and doing that head-to-head moment. So I have to stretch this up a little bit. When you do the diagonal elements, you got to insert a straight section on those diagonal pieces just so the other one nests very nicely into the other side. So we're going to keep doing that here as well. I'm doing flat corners on this one as fairly typical. This is based on an older style of wooden coaster, so we're talking probably a 1930s-ish type wooden coaster design, and or later, could be anywhere between 1930s and 50s perhaps. But we are making sure that the turns are all on the higher side, so you're going to be moving a little bit slower at the time, so we're not dropping down and having a really fast corner that's taken without any of that banking. So this is fairly appropriate for the overall design. I have to do a little bit of pathway rework here. We're actually going to be doing path rework pretty much this entire episode here, which, by the way, is a longer episode since this second half of our build took a little bit longer than the first one, and we continued on after the scenario ended. So there's some bonus stuff, I suppose, and we'll get to that here a little bit later. So here we are connecting this whole thing up, and we have this all situated, and we're getting ready to test the thing. So you can see I've moved the pathway elements just kind of out of the way for now. So at least it's connected up and we're good to go from a connectivity standpoint. We're just going to toss in some huts so we can at least see what's going on. Start with 2 trains and then we'll up to 4 a little bit later. So we're going to test this thing and run it around so we can get it to the other side. So then we can go ahead and see the thing run side by side and see how it does. So while we run that around, we're going to fix our landscape blemishes that we've been kind of destroying our entire hillside over here. Now, if you were paying close attention to that build, you'll notice, as I'm discovering right here, that coaster actually doesn't cross over itself. So while I thought that I was doing that and wasn't really paying attention, turns out it doesn't. So we just created a racing coaster that is two separate tracks and do not actually cross over themselves, despite the dueling moment. So that's an oops. So we need to rework ourselves a little bit. So I've colored the one just to make it exceedingly obvious to myself what we're doing here. And we need to just kind of rework this a little bit, which is a little bit embarrassing, but it happens to the best of us. So while we do this, we're going to look at that absolutely horrendous pathway over here that's just getting absolutely trashed, and fix that up because our park rating is kind of slipping a little bit since we've been paying a lot of attention to this, and time is ticking away while we're doing this. We've definitely spent a fair bit of time, which is part of the challenge of coming up with custom realistic coasters during a scenario build. Unfortunately, these time goals are not optional, so we kind of have to be quick about it, and we have been anything but on this one. So here we can see that new design here where we're going to have that crossover, and we really kind of sort of get rid of the dueling element here, but they are going to split apart and then come back together, and ideally right around that corner there they're going to hit together and try and line up in a hopefully kind of pleasant way. So we're going to see how that looks in a minute, but first there's some brake run to adjust. And while we're going to do that, I'm going to take advantage of raising the thing up just a little bit, which is going to mean the pathway moves again. But that's okay. We're going to put back the old one, and then we'll raise this up and attach it here. That's going to just help us fix some of our path issues a little bit later. Also give us a little bit more brake run space here, which is helpful since we're going to have 4 trains in total. And granted, they'll be a little bit shorter, but we can go ahead and create some space for each of those to live. Now, typically on this kind of coaster, I would use the PTC 3-bench trains, but we don't have those because they didn't exist in RCT1, so we're going to have to just use the standard PTC 2-bench trains, which is what these are based off of, PTC being Philadelphia Toboggan Company. So usually we would do the 3-bench with 3 cars perhaps, or if it's a pretty big guy, we could do 4 cars even. But in this instance, we're going to do a 4-car. Or actually, no, I think we're going to go for longer. I think we're going to end up doing the 6-car here, which is fine. Makes it for a little bit more capacity. At least we can get up to, say, 24 on that one. Now we're going to put in our entrance and exit, which are a little bit convoluted, as you can see here. We're going to fix all that up at some point, but let's test this out first. I'm noticing, too, we've got our 4th train there sitting down in the valley at the end of the brake run, and it's going to roll back on itself right here, so we'll take out that last block brake. Typically, you use those last block brakes to just clear the block sooner, so that the next train gets off the lift hill a little bit quicker, but we don't really need that because we're going to change up our dispatch time intervals so that the train in the station doesn't dispatch until the other ones are nearly home, so we don't have to worry about hold up on top of the lift hill. So now we got it right this time, so second time a charm, I suppose. And in the meantime, we're going to move our Ferris wheel into this kind of center area right here, which a little bit of a shame that we're going to get rid of it on the hillside there. But spoiler alert, this is not the last time we're going to deal with our Ferris wheels in this scenario. But the intention initially was let's get rid of that Ferris wheel up on the hillside and try and turn this into a coaster. Which, fair enough. We'll try and do something here with a junior coaster, since I figured that one might be a decent way to go about it. And this junior coaster is going to give us fits, all sorts of fits. So we are going to experiment a lot with this, and I'm going to leave all of this in because, as I've said plenty of times before, I think it is reasonable and valuable for everybody to see the process of this, that it doesn't all come immediately, and sometimes inspiration is... it's a bit of a process, and sometimes inspiration doesn't actually hit for different things. So I'll tell you right now, if you don't want to see a lot of building of a junior coaster, then skip ahead, because we're going to be doing this for a little bit. But there's plenty to talk about. What I wanted to do on this is use the terrain a little bit and come out of the station fairly early with a nice little drop and a couple of elements, then do a lift hill, then kind of end it with something else. So initially I'm looking at bringing it across here over the wooden coaster, but it offered some complications for how to get back up to our station. And granted, there's all sorts of ways to do it, but in this instance the terrain wasn't super favorable. So you can kind of see what we're doing here as we drop in some advertisements, because we are quickly into August, because we spent forever on that wooden coaster, and we still need 200-ish guests. So we're going to make sure we don't miss that. There's some leftover wooden coaster too from an oops earlier, I guess, when we were kind of reworking that layout, but we'll remove that with Tile Inspector a little later. So after the kind of initial work over by the wooden coaster, I thought, why not come over here and let's do a kind of back and forth little couple of drops and turn around. The challenge we have here is that the whole hillside falls off pretty continuously until the end of the map. So there's not a whole lot that we can do here that's not going to end up in some really high supports, which you don't love. Granted, it's not totally unrealistic, but you also don't love the fact that you have a junior coaster, which in general is sort of a smaller coaster, and largely we focused on kind of terrain-hugging elements, and now all of a sudden we're going to have this thing sitting super high up off the ground. So that's a challenge. You don't really want that corner super way up there, but in general it's not the worst thing to have it if we're forced to, but we're not forced to, so we're going to kind of redo that and try and revise it to something else. But in the meantime, like I said earlier, we do still need to get those guests in the door, so having our swinging inverter ship, we're going to double these up, because that's a really good way to get guests in, raise that soft guest gap up, and just get folks through the door. This would be a shame to put all this effort into the scenario and then lose it in the end, so don't want to do that one. I think so far we've only done that once when we accidentally closed the park on Mothball Mountain, I think it was, when we missed that one. But either way, we're going to fix this thing up. So I get these things going, set this down into the valley a little bit, and shape this up. I feel like these are definitely good back-to-back. I really wish we could sync them up so that they would operate in synchronization, because it just looks good when it does that. And in a lot of cases, you have the looping ship versions like the Zamperla Fireball, I think it might have been called, where it really is just one main arm or support column with two arms and two vehicles, and they operate in synchronization opposite of each other, which, that's kind of neat to have. But here we are cruising through our advertising campaigns. We're making good progress now. We've got 1,100 folks in the park, and we're not too far off of that 1,200 with still a month and a half to go, so not too worried about that. Thankfully, advertising campaigns can be pretty darn strong if we really need it to be. So here's another idea, is maybe try and do like a figure 8 plus, so a figure 8 with a little bit more on it, kind of in line with maybe some of the Zierer Forced 5s that you see at a lot of the larger Legoland parks. Unfortunately not in the US, but some of the other ones have the bigger Zierer coaster, Dragon coaster, but thought through that as a potential option, but we just don't really have the space here, nor do we have the right terrain. This one kind of worked for a minute, but it was so slow over that corner over top of the hill, the lift hill, and we just don't want to have that big of a difference in pacing, I suppose. You really don't want to have it crawl through your layout. It just doesn't make sense. There's definitely real-world precedent to some weird pacing things, but in general, when we're also not just trying to do real-world precedent, but also trying to make good ride design and good ride decisions, that's not a good ride decision. So we're just not going to do that. So here we are as we continue through just trying to figure this thing out, and I think it's becoming increasingly clear that it's just not really wanting to line up, and it's just not quite where we want it to be. On the plus side, though, we're well over 1,300 guests now, and we're into the final third of October, so we will definitely win the scenario at this point, so no longer a concern there. Now, this is sort of a last-ditch effort to kind of wind its way down here underneath the lift hill and try some different things and just kind of see what's going on with it. But in the end, it just doesn't really feel right. And sometimes when the creativity just doesn't hit, you got to take a breath and you got to step back from it. And sometimes that means just putting the game away for a day and going off and coming back. And sometimes it just means as simple as going and doing something else for a minute. And so looking at this further, we're saying, it's just not really working. So in the end, we're going to pause that for a minute and move to another attraction. So here we are with a quick win, and we're not done, though, because we want to finish all this and finish it in a proper way. This little depression in the landscaping, I really wanted to fill with some water here, just because I like water features. It's a great way to organize your park, to have some kind of a water feature that you can look on. It's just a more pleasant experience in general, I think. Water features do a lot for the just quality of a park overall. So we're going to do that, and we're also going to dump a rapids ride in the middle of it, because why not make it interesting too? So we are having not just an kind of entry water feature, but also having an entry water attraction. We've got this sort of unused space here inside the wooden coaster, so we're going to use this for our canvas to build this whole thing. We're going to kind of wind it around through this natural valley here. When I see custom terrain in these scenarios and it has some kind of a valley or a little bit of a ditch or something, usually I try and think, okay, water feature. Now granted, that can be a little bit expensive, so until you're really making some money in the scenario, it's maybe not the way to go. But if you recall, last video we did this on the log flume, so we're doing it sort of at a smaller scale here. But we can wind our way through. Typically, I only like to have a single lift hill if we can avoid it, or maybe a second smaller one to get you back to the station. But I want to have a single lift hill and then either a big drop or a number of smaller drops. Typically, you don't have... Well, I shouldn't say that. Not all log flumes. Rapids rides. Not all rapids rides have a major signature drop. Certainly, some of the more famous ones do, like Infinity Falls at SeaWorld, or... the one at Silver Dollar City, or Popeyes, or Cali River Rapids, or Jurassic at Universal Singapore, which I guess is invalidating some of my comment, because that was a lot of them I just rattled off. But a lot of the more traditional rapids rides, we'll say, so the ones that were built in the 90s and the 2000s, those really don't have a lot of major drops on them. Typically, they were more about the rapids themselves. So that's sort of what we're doing here, and we've got a little tiny drop at the end, nothing super huge, but we're really focused more on the actual kind of whitewater rafting type layout first before we really go on to the rest. So now our front area is starting to shape up a little bit here. We can go through and clean up this landscaping around the rapids ride a little bit. And typically I find the best way to do a rapids ride is just to toss in some rocks, do some dirt and grass in the meantime to transition in between your grass and your rock, and then fill it up with the trees and the bushes as well. And typically with this one, we've got the conifer trees, so we've got that sort of darker green look, which kind of helps it contrast against the bright white of the concrete and the blue of the water. Typically, I like to leave the white concrete if we can. You could paint it, I suppose, but that seems like it would be a maintenance nightmare for a park, so I'm going to leave it as the unfinished white concrete. I guess you could also go for gray, but also depends on kind of what your concrete mix looks like, I suppose. Now, we could go a little more manicured here on the lake itself, but since we've gone sort of rough and natural on the rest of it, I want to do the same here into the lake itself. But along the pathway side will be a little cleaner here as well. Now I'm dropping the landscape around the outside of this turn just to make sure that we don't have the coaster train or coaster track sitting right on the ground. Not that it's necessarily the worst thing for wooden coaster track, but as we've said many a time, in general, try and avoid having your track sitting on the ground. It's just not a good practice, not super realistic, and it just doesn't look good. So, top tip, we're going to keep that raised up just a little bit. And it helps avoid making your landscaping look too similar. Now, in the first video, I said we were going to connect up this pathway here at some point, and we did. Here we go, connecting this across. And this is really just to further disperse the people in the park and also give them a nice little out from this second car ride that we built here, this plaza on this side, which has always been sort of a problem and fairly hard to find for the handyman and things like that. So we're going to connect this across. Unfortunately, we don't have any attractions on the thing except for the two car rides, so it's really not the best pathway. At the very least, we should have had some food and beverage on it, but nothing doing, and there's not really enough space to throw a ride back there because we're right up against the end of the park, or at least the boundary there, so it's just something to avoid. Now we're going to fix the rest of our landscaping that we had moved around for the wooden coaster and clean it up just a little bit. We're also going to get rid of these couple of sections of track here that I somehow left in, but I didn't want to close the ride again, so we just did it in Tile Inspector. And we'll go through and remove all those trees underneath of a ride, so even though your ride can go over top of landscaping, it's not a good idea to do that, because eventually those trees will grow up into your ride envelope, and you don't want to have your ride closed because you have trees growing into it, and you don't want to have your horticulture team having to go in there and deal with it every couple of months, because that just slows things down and makes life difficult for everybody. So typically you will not have trees either underneath or close to a ride track. Something to keep in mind realistically. We're going to throw in some flowers here, also those nice little manicured topiary pieces. We're going to do the suits of cards there, which mirrors what we have over on the other side above the big car ride with the carousel. So I figured that'd be a nice little way to tie the whole park together. Now we're kind of faced with this sort of weird connection piece between the entrance and then once you get into the park. You got to go underneath the brake run of the wooden coaster, which is really not ideal. It's just not a super pleasant experience with, sort of the slow part of the ride. It's kind of loud, it's kind of noisy, kind of smells maybe, and it's just not really a great experience. We're going to dress it up a little bit, but first I want to align this pathway over top of the coaster drop. We added that straight section in the bottom just for smoothness on the ride, but that also helps make it a prime spot to stick this thing in. And we can remove this temporary pathway that we have over top of the water, because really you don't want to build over top of the water, you want to build next to the water. You want it to be a viewing spot, not a place of movement. So we're going to delete this so we can actually look down into this water area and have a nice view there. It sort of acts as a reflecting pond to the little wooden wild mouse there as well, and sort of a great entry feature as you kind of cross this bridge and get into the park proper. So while it's not a super accessible water area, it's at least a kind of pleasant space within it. So we're going to do that first, but as we move some things around here, move this drink stand around, put a little seating area here, add some fencing and all that, we're still keeping in mind this entry process, and I kind of look at this almost as sort of the park having two entries. Certainly there's the real entry where you come into the park through the gate, then there's sort of the secondary entry, which is, to me, when you cross underneath of this wooden coaster. So we've got sort of a mess of pathway over here right now, like this exit path that goes over top of the queue, and it's just sort of a spaghetti and it's really hard to read, and if you can't easily follow the pathways with your eyes, then it's probably a little too complicated. So we're going to fix that up. We're going to move that exit pathway underneath a tunnel right there, go under the queue, and now we've cleaned that up just a little bit. So now this lets us lower some of the landscaping here and clean up this entry process. So we're going to bring 3 pathways underneath of this, and we're going to adjust this queue, adjust the pathway here, and then lower this whole thing down, including moving that balloon stall to fit. But by doing this and by changing the pathway type and everything, we now create sort of an entrance feature. So this feels more like a grand entrance. We're going to step it away from the brake run there by 1 tile as well. And then this lets us put some flower beds in here. It also lets us take a hedge piece and screen the piece there. And now it just looks a little better in general. So it's a lot cleaner and it feels more like a defined entry, which I think is fairly nice. Now we can also fix this up here and give ourselves a fountain. In the meantime, while we've been spending so much time doing this and we're in nearly the end of year 4, we pretty much have everything researched now, which includes that Roman scenery, which lets us do what I think is the best fountain in the game, to be honest, the square one, mostly just because it fits the grid a little bit better and is clean. Here our our Ferris wheel returns in grand fashion. We can get rid of this one as well. In the end, that was the place for I keep saying carousel. That was the place for the Ferris wheel. It was nice to have that view and kind of perched up on the hill. It really is the place for it. So in the meantime, we're going to try a couple of different things. Since the junior coaster didn't work out, we're going to look at a junior wooden coaster. Now this one's kind of based a little bit on Tomahawk at Port Aventura, which is next to Stampede, which is also a racing and dueling coaster. It's 2 different layouts there from CCI. Good set of coasters there. Not maybe the most comfortable, but they're a good layout. But another CCI coaster, Tomahawk, got added to that whole mix at some point, and sections of the track on that one follow the racing coaster, and there's sections where if you get the timing exactly right, you're going to end up with all 3 trains right parallel to each other all at the same time. Super cool idea, but wasn't really working here, especially with the twister elements to this, or the curved elements to our Mobius coaster here. So we're going to abandon it for a second, but we will bring it back in a different way here in just a minute. But first, a car ride, because why not do another car ride? You can never have too many. We got this nice little gap there inside the wooden coaster, and we needed another attraction on this side kind of before you cross the coaster there and head into the main park. I want to build a little track here, so nothing too much. We're going to color this something a little more normal than icy blue, which is sort of a weird choice to begin with, but anyway, we're going to go ahead and put in our stuff. We're going to use the racing cars because we haven't used that just yet. And we're going to go a little bit darker in here since we got the conifer trees. We're going to also use the conifer hedge, and that'll clean it up and offer a little bit of a point of difference from our kind of lighter and brighter hedge. So the ride itself is going to be a little darker, which would be kind of nice. Would have been good to toss in some mine scenery here, but we weren't really thinking about it at the time. And also making sure that our crossovers don't kill too much of the supports on the wooden coaster. And granted, in this game, it doesn't matter how many supports you kill, it'll still stand up. But we want to at least have it make sense visually before we get too far. And we're also going to toss a little spiral slide over here just because. So one of the things that I was thinking about as we went a little further along here was, why don't we do something a little more parallel over here? You can see we got the issue with that giant support structure first because we're off the side of the hill. Same issue we had with the junior coaster. But after a while, I thought, I wonder how much you could wrap this Ferris wheel. And in the end, we could. It actually works fairly well and fairly cleanly to do it like this and also take advantage of the hill for a diving drop, which you'll see I'm currently building this backwards, so we're going to have to fix that in a little bit. But I like the idea of the Ferris wheel sitting inside this coaster turnaround, so you really have to get like a third of the way up on the Ferris wheel to really kind of suddenly now have a great view of the park over top of this wooden coaster, and you get this great interaction element as well while you're on the ride of your little kind of junior coaster screaming by while you're sitting on the Ferris wheel. So I feel like it'd be a pretty cool interactive element. One of the things that it does require, just from a clearance standpoint, is we got to relocate the queue and the exit for this one, which isn't necessarily ideal, but at the same time, I don't like a really long stretch of pathway without an interrupted flat section. Typically, I try and avoid doing any more than 2 or maybe even 3 pathway pieces in a row before we get up to a flat section. So in this case, we can really terrace that and just make it look a little better. So now we're kind of building in 2 different directions since we built our midpoint first. And as I've said plenty of times before, I like to start with an interactive element if we can. So start with your main interaction, start with your main view, start with your main whatever, and make that work before you really get into anything a little further than that. So what we're going to do here is put in a little speed hill, and then we'll do our drop from there. And do the lift hill after that. For a little bit, I was trying to see maybe we could do a curving small drop here because we're doing the curving drop on the other end, but in the end, it didn't really look quite right with that section there. It just didn't feel exactly right. This one feels like a 40s or 50s type wooden coaster. You really didn't get these diving corners outside of stuff like maybe what Harry Traver was doing in the 20s. You really didn't see these kind of diving corners until Herb Schmeck kind of got into it for PTC a little later on in the development, so that was more of a 40s and 50s sort of thing. So that's really where I kind of pegged this coaster at, a little bit older or a little bit newer than the Mobius coaster next to it. A little more daring perhaps with that little diving drop, as kind of crazy as that seems. But this little layout is enough, and we've got basically a single out and back that kind of curves in on itself, so nearly a double out and back, I suppose. Gives us enough space to do 2 trains, and now we're up on the hillside so we can connect up our pathway and get ready to open this thing up. I don't love having queues and exits that are way off on a side kind of path or challenging to find or things like that, but there's plenty of real world precedent. Stealth Thorpe Park is way off on its own. You have Six Flags America, which is just like the world's worst park layout, but and in the end it kind of is what it is. What we're going to do here though is swap over our entrance and our exit on the Ferris wheel, because that lets us reuse the exit pathway as the entrance pathway for the wooden coaster. So now we can clean that up just a little bit and give ourselves some nice access there, add in some fencing, just make it look good in general. And the ride does pretty well, I think. It gets a nice full queue here in a minute, and runs fairly nicely compared to the rest of it as well. Gets us another coaster attraction and just fills out the space a little bit better. Lastly, here we're going to go ahead and color these ride vehicles on Double Trouble back to the original ones that we started the scenario with. And that's pretty much going to do it. So that is our scenario. And we have won it, plus taken it into year 5 already. So let's jump over to the real-time portion, and we'll go take a tour of this, and then we'll do some before and after. So let's hop on over and take a look. And here we have our completed Crumbly Woods Park. I think we did a pretty good job filling out the whole thing. It looks fairly decently filled. So let's jump on in here at the front of the park. We're doing pretty well attendance-wise, 1,400 guests, so I kind of like this plaza here as you start in. You almost kind of have the pre-park before the park. I'd almost kind of think about where you cross underneath the brake run here, sort of as the formal entry to the park maybe, but there's still some stuff outside of it. We've got our rapids ride here that activates this lake a little bit, gives you something to watch on the way in, and winds its way through this forest, fills in this nice open space there in the wooden coaster. Spinning around the other side, you've got the Ferris wheel that's lived there off and on through the entire build. I think this was Ferris wheel number 4 maybe, but wrapped around by this wooden coaster that I think does pretty well as a junior wooden coaster here. So this one I think works pretty well. I need to reset the timings here so we don't get the lift stop, but we'll go here in just a second. So this one has high, medium stats, and that seems about right for the unbanked corners, which probably add up a little bit to that. But when you consider that both of these coasters were sort of envisioned as like late 20s, early 30s type wooden coasters, then I think it works fairly well. Actually, maybe a little bit later than that. The diving corner wasn't really a thing until the early 40s, I want to say, with Herb Schmeck being the first guy to really do that. So, aside from Traver, I suppose. But anyway, pre-1950s, we'll say. Of course, our big wooden coaster here, we can pick up on this one. So we called this one Double Trouble the Revenge since we redid it. And I think it turned out fairly well, especially from the dueling and racing aspect. More racing than dueling. There's really only one kind of half dueling moment, I suppose. But the alternating of the corners, trying to keep them at the same speed and everything, that really helped to balance things out. So I was at least semi-confident when opening the coaster for the first time that it was probably going to somewhat line up. I do really like this kind of drop over the lake here at the kind of mid or second third of the ride, maybe. I think that works really well. And then here we go with a nice lineup. Look at that. It does vary who wins based on the number of peeps in the train, which is kind of fun. I like that. It means you got it right when that happens. And our little car ride here that we squeezed in. Up the hill, as you cross over top of the coaster, you can split either way, left and right. Get this great view of the Wooden Wild Mouse here on the way in. You've got our double towers here from SNS. You got the shot tower and the drop tower. Fit very nicely on top of the hill. Nice little viewing area. You can cut to this side and you can get to our car ride, which if I had done this again, I might have considered maybe relocating the station over here somewhere. Although we really didn't want to get into that too much. Like I didn't want to rework the layout. Like this layout's already as iconic as they come, and I didn't really want to do much more than split it up into 2 rides. We did connect around the side here. Not a lot of attractions going on here. This maybe could have become like a food court or something, just to give it a little more something, because really from, call it, here to all the way over here to this plaza, there's only 2 things to do, and those are each of the car rides. But I didn't want to adjust this at all, just because this is as iconic as it comes, and didn't really want to mess with that. On the hill, we've got our haunted house, which has a nice little themed curved pathway. You've got this cool walk through this kind of overgrown yard, maybe a graveyard. If we had the gravestones, we would have used them. And our horse statue there. Got the carousel up on top, and then our suspended coaster. This one is high across the board, which is fairly typical for a suspended coaster. Pretty happy with this layout, kind of double loop, as it were, mostly turning left, but also enough right-hand corners to kind of even it out just a little bit, and keep the thing swinging well. Really, I don't want to do too many straight hills, more corners and diving drops than anything, just because you want to keep that swinging motion going and really keep the flow going. Hills are kind of the last thing you want to look at, or straight hills anyway. It's not a super common thing. Log flume underneath is kind of standard fare here. You got the crossover here, so there's the consideration as to whether this one came first or the suspended coaster came first, which one feels less forced, I suppose. Nice little drop here with the interaction of the coaster, and then also this great viewing area there. Our swinging ship, the observation tower, and the scrambler, as well as our swinging inverter ship and the slides. We got plenty of supporting rides here. Then you've got Whiplash 2, which is our replacement of the arrow launch loop and turning it around the other direction, which I think was a smart move because you have a lot less height for the pathway. And now we return back. Unfortunately, I still have the little spike, but we already talked about that. Lastly, we've got the coaster here, the wooden wild mouse, mean squeak, the squeakle. Okay, I think. I do like that it retains the original big drop and everything. Not totally unrealistic, but tending kind of that way. And then you have the more realistic finish to the thing. So at least custom layout, sort of interesting. And I'm pretty happy with it still, because you still retain the look of the overall thing. Stats for this, by the way, high, medium. For Whiplash 2, it is medium, low. And then for Double Trouble, I forgot to do this one earlier, you get very high, and high, which feels about right. There's a lot of unbanked corners there, especially some taken fairly quickly, but not too bad overall. But there really isn't too many places we can squeeze something else. Certainly back here, there's a little bit of space underneath and behind the wooden coaster here if we really wanted to. Could maybe fit something on the hillside here and then on this one over here. But it feels comfortably full. I don't think we want to stack too much else on top of it. So I'm pretty happy with how it turned out, and I think it worked out pretty well. Let me know what you think, though, in the comments, and what was your favorite coaster and all that. We will go here into the before and afters, but before that, want to thank Sammy for the music that we're going to hear in just a minute. Last video, I put music over top of the time-lapse portion as well. Got a lot of comments on that one saying that generally seems like people prefer to not have the music or have it changed, like a little bit quieter or whatever. Would love to hear your feedback. I didn't put the music over the audio this time just to by way of comparison, so would certainly love to hear what you all think about it, because I am always here for feedback to make our videos as good as possible, or at least as easy to listen to as possible. So let me know in the comments, music or no music, is the volume good, whatever other thoughts you may have, and what you liked about the scenario. So let's jump over to the before and afters, and as always, we will see you in the next one. Thanks as ever for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye now.